I suppose the thing I really want to start with in general when it comes down to people having incidents in the water is that it is almost all the time a mismanagement of the circumstances, right? It's not necessarily that someone has, you know, stuffed up or someone's done this or someone's done that. It's just someone has mismanaged their day or mismanaged their dive or mismanaged the circumstances around it. So the first thing I want to talk about is, well, we're going to talk about three main things tonight. We're going to talk about blackouts, by which I mean hypoxic blackouts, because there are other ways to black out, as we all know. We're talking about hypoxic blackouts. We're going to talk about decompression illness, and we're going to talk about lung squeezes or lung barotraumas. And we're going to, and I suppose as we go through our case studies, we'll see, I suppose, all of those things and why it's happened and you know, what's been going on. I do apologize if I'm not as prepared as I wanted to be for this as well, just because we did have the baby and no one has slept and everyone's running on adrenaline. So just, you know, if we're just piecing it together as we go, that's just why. All right, let's start with blackouts. I mean, the first thing I do want to say is that a hypoxic blackout is not a shallow water blackout. I know that the term shallow water blackout gets thrown around a lot, but it's not. We should as a community, we should make a point of getting rid of that term, because a shallow water blackout. Sorry, Carmen. I know you put shallow water blackout in the title of this, but because all blackouts that we get in freediving are hypoxic blackout, or was it Liv did it? All blackouts that we get in freediving are hypoxic blackouts, and there are some scenarios where us ascending, or you know, ascending in general, contributes towards us blacking out, but the mechanism is still a hypoxic blackout. They're all hypoxic blackouts, you know, like hypoxic blackout, I did this, and one hypoxic blackout, I did that, and one hypoxic blackout, I was ascending. Does that make sense? It's just one of the factors in a hypoxic blackout. We're talking about hypoxic blackouts. How many times did I say hypoxic blackouts in the last 2 minutes? Anyway, so the most important thing about it is that I suppose, well, let's rephrase that. There are 1,000 things that contribute to a person blacking out when they are holding their breath in the water or holding their breath in general, right? So I suppose I wanted to go down to maybe like a little, or just ramble off a little list of them. But the most common reason that leads to people blacking out is hyperventilation. And we'll talk about ventilating as we go on, and I suppose we'll try to define it in a real world sense, and then once we define it, we'll talk about why it's almost impossible to never hyperventilate, right? So we'll talk about this as we cruise along. But so hyperventilating is the #1 reason why people do blackout, which we'll get to in a bit. The other one is fatigue, right? Like every single dive is different. And this is one of the, like when we're talking about breath holding safety and freediving safety, it's one of the reasons why we need to have many systems in place, and why we can't just, you know, say things like, I know my limit, man, or like, you know, my buddy's over there, or you know what I mean? You have to have so many different systems in place, because the truth is depending on how well we are, how many dives we've done that day, how big were those, how hydrated we are, if we're stressed, if we had a bloody argument with our wife before we went diving. Not that I've argued with my wife, of course, she's an angel. She argues with me. Our blood sugar is like, you know what I mean? Like, when did we eat last? What did we eat? What's our diet like? You see what I mean? So every factor in your lifestyle will lead to contribute towards your, right? And now when we're talking about a blackout is when someone reaches the absolute maximum of what their body is capable of. It's a maximum performance. So this is why it's appropriate to think of it in the context of like, well, this little 1% and this little 2% and this little 3%, because we're going to 100%, we're going to the max. Shaving 5% off is the difference between blacking out or not blacking out, or surviving or not surviving. So every little factor like contributes towards this thing. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to have Carmen pop a video up. So Carmen, pop up video number 1. Video number 1 is a video of me blacking out in competition. And I wanted to start with this video because it's actually an environment in which, you know, most of us won't find ourselves in all the time, which is, you know, diving on a line, right? We're diving in a super controlled environment. On a line, all the variables are pretty much taken care of, right? So I wanted to start just with that video. And yeah, sorry, Carmen, whenever you're ready. There we go. Oh, so I come up to the surface. I start trying to recovery breathe. I flop over. I end up, you know, getting a few breaths in. And then because I've been unconscious, I have no idea what's been going on. And I take my nose clip off. Thought I made the dive. So that's a pure, it's very heard. Was it the video that was choppy, or is it my screen that's choppy? Hermione.
I think it's your screen
video.
more than the video, okay. But yeah.
Oh, well, we'll just do what we can. So in that regard, what you just saw then was, I suppose, like just a normal, pure, unadulterated blackout. Now, one of the only things that a freediver or a spearfisher can do as far as their safety is to recovery breathe after every single dive, right? Carmen, can I play the video again? Maybe we'll just see if that goes through. So,
sorry, yeah.
A diver should recovery breathe after every single. Yep. Cool. Not because we always need to recover, but because we just need to ingrain this we need to ingrain it into our muscle memory. We need to make this rote. We need to make this something that we do even when we are literally unconscious, because after every single dive of our life, we've come up and we have done this breathing, which is the only reason why I recovered here on my own, rather than having rather than someone else having to revive me. Trying to breathe, out, coming up. Woo! Cool. All right, so that's a simple kind of blackout. And what I'm going to do as we go along, we're going to get a bit more, a few more sort of like complex scenarios and talk about what's going on and you know how to avoid. But in general, in regards to that blackout, why did I black out right there in that in that? Oh yeah, here we go, Carmen. That's right. Carmen, you might want to download the video rather than play it off Google Drive. Maybe that will fix it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there any way to turn the bell sound off?
I was trying to, but I'm trying to manage 5 things at once. Sorry. I've been trying to work out how to turn that time off. Yeah. Leave it with me a second. I can't. 3 things at once.
Yeah. So why did I black out on that dive and not that exact dive that I'd done in training, or a dive deeper than that I'd done in training? And the reason for that, why did I black out that dive, is because I was diving while I was sick, right? So here I was, I suppose I was recovering from a cold in a competition, and I wasn't feeling great. And obviously, you know, went beyond my whatever my daily limit was. And that's, I suppose, an important thing to also come to terms with, is that a diver's limit fluctuates, as you know, like from day to day. Like in any sport, a human's, you know, capacity fluctuates from day to day. So it's just when we are diving for ourselves, or when we're training for ourselves, we just have to have that in mind. We just you can't think of yourself as I'm this kind of a diver or I'm that kind of a diver. We just have to go with whatever you are on that day. And of course, you'll have like a kind of like, you know, I can do this to this, you know, like a range that you can expect from your body, because otherwise, you know, we'd be lost. But does that make sense? We just need to operate within a spectrum rather than assume like a static performing level from yourself, which would be just unreasonable to expect from yourself. Now the next one, I wanted to get the next video up, Carmen, if we're ready for it. So the next video I'm going to show you was when I was spearfishing with a friend, and we basically found this cave full of mangrove jacks at about 25 meters. And this guy that I was spearing with is very good, very experienced, and much deeper diver than that. So, you know, very comfortable spearing at those depths. And he ends up having a raging samba at the end of the dive. Watch the video and then we'll talk about what happened. Whenever you're ready, Carmen, let's rock and roll. Oh, sorry, this was the wrong video. If I told you this was video number 2, Carmen, I was wrong. Ignore me. Do the other one. Not the first one, the one after this, maybe. I don't know.
Sorry, Adam, which one? Okay.
The one where you can see the person's holding a spear gun. Not the first. I think it'd be towards the end of the clippy thing. A lot further than that.
The next one was 3.5.
Ellie's Blackout. Ellie's here, by the way. We can chat to Ellie about her Blackout. It's a really good one. Ellie has a really valuable lesson. All right, whenever you're ready.
There you go.
All right. So cruising down into this cave, and he basically has a shot. Oh, have you had his shot yet? I don't know. He's going to have, oh no, he's back on the surface. This is Tom. Tom's back on the surface and he's breathing to go down. He lines up a shot in the cave. He misses the mangrove jack and the spear shaft gets stuck in the cave. I'll tell you what, I'm just going to narrate the video because, you know, we're only getting frames. So the shaft gets stuck in the bottom in the cave and he tries to shake it loose a little bit and then realizes that, that's a good frame, realizes that he's not going to get the shaft out. He goes back to the surface and as he gets to the surface, he starts having a very big samba and I was next to him and I held him up and then he starts to recover again. So let's break down the situation, talk about what happened and effectively what we can learn from it. So when Tom and I had been diving to this cave for about half an hour or so. We were really sussing it out. There were like a few real monster mangrove jacks right up the back, and we were trying to work it. You know what I mean? Like we're trying to get in and get the big fellas. My dog's whining actually. He wants to go outside, but you cannot go outside. Trapped. And he sorry. So we've done quite a few dives to this depth. Now, I just want to say here that like spear fishing at 25 meters is quite deep. Like that's quite deep spear fishing, right? Like free diving to 25 meters and spear fishing at 25 meters, they're just worlds, like absolute worlds apart. So it's quite an advanced and experienced spear fisher that can spear at these depths. So we're spearing at these depths. The shaft gets stuck. He cruises back up, and then that happens. So, breaking it all down. Obviously, we have the factor of you never know what's going to go wrong in a dive, or you never know what's going to go on a dive. And that's the thing about spearfishing is that it's all totally unplanned, right? You're you don't know what fish you're going to see down there. You don't know how deep you're going to dive. You don't know what's going to happen when you shoot that fish. Will your shaft get stuck? Will the fish run off? Will it be easy to pull in? Do you have the juice in the tank now to swim back up carrying your fish? All right, I'm going to let the dog out because he keeps telling me how unhappy he is. So, So number one, we have I suppose the factor that Tom's shaft got stuck in the cave, and on the dive that he shot the fish, so he was obviously down there stalking and hanging out for a little bit, he also tried to get the shaft out. Now, that's a call that some divers make. Some divers always abandon their shaft. Some divers will give it a little wiggle, see if it'll come free, and, you know, whatever. It's a case-by-case scenario. But it is a factor that led to him sombering on this dive. The other factor is, like, going back to what we were saying about fatigue, we had been diving on this cave for about half an hour. So Tom had done, you know, a few dives down to this cave. So perhaps his body was tired from the repetitions of the deep dives. That's a factor too. And, you know, because as we might know, I don't know, I mean, I suppose here I am leaping over a whole bunch of information that we typically like teach on courses, but obviously this is, I suppose, a webinar for more people who have a base level of understanding of what is going on anyway, right? So we always can perform best on our first dive, or we can always perform best earlier in the day. The more we dive, the more fatigued we get. So so the fact that he'd done a few dives obviously made him more tired. But then the big one was, I was chatting to Tom afterwards, and I was like, why do you reckon you had a samba on that dive? You know, like, that's not a big dive for you. You know, I think we looked at his computer, he was under the water for like 1:20 or something like that. And he said, well, you know, I knew I was going down for a big one. I knew on that dive I really wanted to land one of those mangrove jacks. And so I had a really long breathe up, which is classic, right? It's classic that when you're getting ready for a big dive, that you spend a much longer period of time on the surface breathing beforehand. And what do you reckon happens? What do you think inevitably happens when the person breathes for a long time before a dive getting ready? They will inevitably hyperventilate. Humans love hyperventilating. All right? They just do. Don't ask me why, but divers love it. They bloody love hyperventilating, and they always do it. I'm sure we can make like a fun meme about this thing anyway. So that was really what happened. So we have a dive in which this person knows he can do, and they're a little bit fatigued, and, you know, they think, oh, you know, I'll get ready for a big one, and they just over breathe, and they black out earlier. And just to clarify, there are two main issues with hyperventilating. The first issue with hyperventilating is when we do it, we postpone the period of time before we get the urge to breathe. And the second thing is that we reduce our body's maximum breath hold time. So we don't get any urge to breathe for a lot longer, and then we reduce the period of time we can hold our breath for, which is why the most common phrase anyone ever hears about blackouts is, you know, oh man, like, I don't know what happened. Like, I felt so good on the dive, you know, the dive felt so good, you know, because they didn't get any urge to breathe. And the moment they did, they were unconscious. So they have no idea what's going on. So hyperventilation leads to, I would go as far as to say, most blackouts in spearfishing and freediving. So it's something that we have to keep track of, but how, right? How do we define hyperventilation? And now, okay, well, let's first define it, and then we'll talk about how we apply it, and we'll talk about how impossible it really is. So let's say, oh, sorry, I just saw one of the questions pop up. It looked interesting, so I got sidetracked. We'll get to questions soon. How about we'll do a question pause after this little, I'll do a little chat, and then we'll do a pause for questions. Cool? Because otherwise we'll get to the end and it'll just be too much to take in, and people will have forgotten what we spoke about earlier. Sounds so good, hyperventilation. Yeah, cool. So we have a rhythm of breathing called tidal breathing, which is the rate that we breathe when our bodies are at rest. Now, the rate that we breathe when our bodies are at rest is also the rate in which we're breathing, in which our body performs the best, right? So when we're tidal breathing, our body performs best. We can hold our breath for a very long period of time because we're keeping a lot of carbon dioxide in the body, and carbon dioxide is what triggers the body to hold its breath for a long time. We can talk about that another day, the details of that. So tidal breathing, if we can work this out mathematically, and we'll do, obviously when we do this stuff, we do this with averages. So on average, when a person is tidal breathing, their inhaling and exhaling roughly 15 times per minute, and they're inhaling and exhaling roughly 500 mils of air per breath, which means that in a period of 1 minute, that person sitting on the couch, laying in bed, will inhale and exhale about 7.5 liters of air. So you think of it this way, any volume of gas that goes in a person's lungs is a volume of gas that carbon dioxide can mix in with and escape with. So we need to think of breathing for freediving as volume of gas exchanged or a volume of gas breathed over time. Or in this case, a minute's an easy one to deal with. So anytime we breathe more than 7.5 liters of air per minute, we're hyperventilating. So how the hell do we do that in the water? Well, I can say, all right, well, let's just tidal breathe, right? And we can do a bunch of exercises where I get everyone to tidal breathe and register what tidal breathing is. Cool. And that works. You know, that works when we're training in the pool. That works when we're diving on a line. Now, what happens when we are fun diving? What happens when we go swimming offshore and we're playing around on a reef and you've been kicking against some current? And I'm like, don't hyperventilate, man. And you're like, in your head, like, oh, I've got to tidal breathe. But you actually need to breathe like this. Right? How do we manage the situation? The truth is that the only thing we can really do is try to get, yeah, that's right. Johan has just said it's a common situation in spearfishing. Man, it's an every time situation in spearfishing, right? Pretty much. So the only thing we can really do is get away from controlling our breathing and let our body breathe naturally for us, right? So tidal breathing is what happens when we are not thinking about our breathing. Right? It's when we're breathing subconsciously with our parasympathetic nervous system. We want to be able to do the same thing while we are swimming, right? Because the truth is our body will breathe at the rate it needs to for the level of exercise that we're doing, so long as we don't try to control it. Now that's tricky, right? Like that's near impossible, to be absolutely honest with you. And when we teach freediving courses, we don't teach that. How can you I'm just gonna, there we go, Carmen, you beat me to it. How can you teach a safety system to someone that is unregulatable, right? Does that make sense? That a person can't really enforce for themselves, I suppose, without like a huge level of awareness that comes over many years of diving. And so the truth is we try to stay away from it. We try our very best to get people to tidal breathe all the time. And if they're diving in some current and they get the urge to breathe early, then that is the result of staying safe. But you know, if we're having a real conversation, if you're able to get out of if you're able to not control your breathing, if you're able to let your body breathe at the rate in which it wants to for the level of exercise that you're doing, then that should be okay, right? Because if we're kicking faster, if I'm swimming along in the water, I'm creating more carbon dioxide in my body, right? So I can breathe a little bit faster and the carbon dioxide level should be balanced in my body. Cool. So let's pause for questions now before I move on to a different topic in general. So yeah, questions. Where were we? Who are we starting with? Who's doing what?
We're starting with Philip. Philip, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Andrew, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. So my question, I'm a bit of a rookie. I'm a scuba diver, but only just wanting to get into free diving, so don't know as much as probably most people here. But if you've gone on a free dive or spearfishing, and then you've swam against the current, like you just said, you come up and you're hyperventilating a bit, or breathing quicker than usual. How long would you have to do sort of a sort of free dive breathe up in terms of slowing your breathing down intentionally or something like that to sort of undo that hyperventilation, undo the sort of lower CO2 level that hyperventilation just caused?
Yeah. Well, that's a tricky question because it depends on how much you hyperventilated, right? But let's just put a time frame on it. We'll say between 2 and 5 minutes, depending on the extremity. But I suppose, like all of like everything here that we're talking about is grey, isn't it? Because we're talking about human bodies human bodies fluctuating around doing dives in the water. I just saw Johan put a comment up that says hyperventilation doesn't lead to blackout all the time. No, it does not. Hyperventilation does not always lead to blackouts, but it certainly is a good road to one. Anyway, what was the next question?
Andrea, is it? Are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Almost. It's Andre.
Andre, I apologize. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I actually kind of had two. They're a bit similar. The first one was whether there's any similarity between hyperventilating and packing, like you're taking in way more than you would normally, and is there any similar danger in packing? And then the second one was just I think I heard Adam mention that hyperventilating, obviously it decreases the urge to breathe, and that's dangerous, and I get that, but you also mentioned that it lowers your ability to hold the breath. And I don't know if I heard that right, but I just didn't really understand that bit.
So we don't really have time to go into the physiology, but hyperventilating actually decreases the period of time that the human body can hold its breath for without unconsciousness, and quite dramatically too. So that happens. Your first question about packing and hyperventilating, those are two completely different things. Hyperventilation, or when we talk about hyperventilation, we're referring to how a person breathes in preparation for a breath hold. When we're talking about packing, we're talking about a very advanced inhalation technique that some crazy freedivers use to forcibly pack extra air into their lungs on top of their full breath. And there are a smorgasbord of associated risks that come along with doing that we don't have time to talk about. But let's just say if you have not been shown what packing is, and you're not holding your breath for more than 6 or 7 minutes, or diving deeper than 50 or 60 meters, you don't need to pack. Question. I know that we're doing this in line, but I just saw a question from Nina. How much does your instinct play a role in your breathing? That's a fantastic question that we'd probably really unpack. I don't really know. Maybe a lot. Sorry, Carmen. It might differ from person to person.
No, you're okay. That's great. We've got a lot of questions here, so we're just trying to work through them all. I do have Tom, who's got his hand up in the corner there, and that's been there for a while. So Tom, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, hey Adam. I was just wondering, sorry I don't have a camera, but did you know you were going to black out? And similarly, I know there was someone else on the call that's had a blackout too. There's certain signs that you're warned about from a blackout. Did you know that was going to happen before it happened?
No, I didn't. Now, keep in mind, so people talk a lot about the signs of a blackout and looking out for the signs of a blackout. But what I can promise you is that by the time you are picking up on any signs, it is way too late for you to respond to them, and you'll be unconscious before you know it, or you're already more or less unconscious because you don't have time to respond to it. There are a lot of pool freedivers, like very experienced pool freedivers who I talk to that talk about really knowing exactly that fine point where they're right at the edge, and then coming up beforehand. I've never personally been that experienced with hypoxia to be like, oh, there's me right on the edge, and I start to breathe. I suppose being a depth athlete, we become hypoxic a lot less frequently than pool freedivers who are really always going to the edge. You know what I mean? Cool. All right, what do we got next?
Sorry. Hi, Adam. I think that we probably continue on just looking at the time, and then we can do more questions at the end.
Cool. We're not. There's no way in hell we're going to stick to an hour. Anyway.
We knew that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about lung injuries, and I want to go on to our next blackout, and I'm going to get Mrs. Ellie Hayden to unmute her microphone as well. Everyone meet Ellie Hayden, niece of a very famous cricketer, freediving instructor extraordinary.
Every time, Adam.
If anyone is a fan of cricket, not that I am. You'll know who her uncle is. Okay, so Carmen, if you could play this video, and then Ellie, if you don't mind, because you're here, do you want to like give everyone a little bit of a chat about what happened on the dive before this one, and then what happened on this dive, and then we can unpack it at the end and talk about what really happened. Does that, you know what I mean? Let's talk about what it felt like and what was going on underwater for you.
Yeah, for sure. So the dive before this dive was the important one, I guess. What happened on the dive before this one is it was the second dive of the day. I'd been out of the water for like a month because I had problems with ear infection. So I hadn't dived in a month. We went to this spot straight up. It was 25 meters was the shallowest part of the reef, and it dropped straight down to 50. So it was really hard. It was quite murky conditions. It was really hard to see where we were landing. I didn't want to dive deeper than 20 meters on this day. Anyways, on the first dive, I ended up diving to about 25 meters. I saw a school of amberjack swimming from the side, and stupidly, I wasn't thinking. I did like this big turn with my gun, bit of gymnastics, and turned fully around to the other side to try get these amberjacks. And then I didn't realize I'd done anything at the time, but on the swim up, I remember feeling just like nothing left in the tank, just so gassed. Felt like crap, felt like utter crap. I was puffing heaps. I was like, what the heck's going on? But yeah, just didn't really like tune into those feelings, I guess.
Cool. So, all right, so let's I suppose unpack what has happened. So we have two dives to look at, right? So we have one dive where we go down, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're going down and we're swinging around violently for amberjacks. I just saw a funny comment. Yes, I know. Going for amberjacks. Don't go for amberjacks. So swung around for some amberjacks, and then you go down for another dive at around the same old depth. And it's a dive, correct me if I'm wrong, it was quite a short dive. I think you told me what your dive time was. It's around a minute something, quite short for you.
The second dive was a minute 35. Yeah, so it wasn't like it's super long.
Yeah, something that you should have been able to do any day of the week. And you've come up and you're getting towards the surface, and then you black out. So what happened to Ellie? And it's funny because I was having a chat with Ellie about this. Really good thing for a diver to, when they do have a blackout, to really talk about what happened and do a bit of like diving forensics and work out what was the issue, why did I black out, just so that a diver doesn't sit there with this idea of, oh man, like what's wrong, and there's where my limit is, and then they get nervous and scared to dive again. So knowing why it happened is half the battle to getting back in the water and feeling comfortable again. So we're talking about what was going on, and so some of you, the answer might have leapt out at you, but being down at 25 meters and doing a very large movement can very easily lead to a lung squeeze or a lung injury or a lung barotrauma, which is when we have blood plasma or blood that moves into our actual into our lung air spaces, or the area where the oxygen will be exchanging from our airspace into the bloodstream. So basically you just think of it as a blood vessel ruptures and your lungs are bleeding. So when a person has a lung squeeze, they have very impaired lung function, because there's a very large or whatever part, wherever the blood is, that's a part of their lungs that is not functioning. It's not transferring oxygen. So in Ellie's regard, she's gone down she's had a lung squeeze on a dive beforehand, and then she's gone up, she's breathed, la-di-da, and she's gone down again. And on that next dive, she is putting more pressure on her lungs, making the squeeze worse. So pumping more blood, more blood gets pumped around the lungs, to inhibit the oxygen transfer. And she blacks out significantly earlier than she should have, or than she could have. Now, I wanted to talk about this blackout in particular because spearfishing. Now, let's talk a little bit about why we can have lung squeezes. So the first thing that I actually want to say is, now, and this one can be very much up for debate, because the truth is there's been very little study done into lung barotraumas or lung squeezes on breath hold, and most of the stuff I know, it's really anecdotal evidence. It's like, you know, over the past 10 years on the competitive freediving circuit, I have seen these people do these dives and it results in these lung squeezes, or I see this happening and it's resulting in that lung squeeze. Does that make sense? So that's where this kind of comes from, because there's really no paper I can point you to. There's no doctor I can even point you to, and they can be like, this is why it happens, and this is what we cannot do, and la-di-da. So in my opinion, the main contributor towards a person having a lung barotrauma, a lung squeeze, is based on the strength of that person's blood shift. So we know that, you know, as we're diving down, our lungs compress, blood plasma from the blood around our lungs moves into the blood vessels around our lungs. And so the blood vessels in our lungs bloat, they become larger to handle the pressure. And any blood vessel that has become bloated is much more susceptible to rupture. Now, let's say if I'm diving to, so let me just backtrack. So in order to cope with the pressure of depth, and this is a part of our body's normal function for diving. In order to cope with the pressure of depth, our body places or it draws in blood plasma from the blood around our lungs into the capillaries, into the blood vessels in the lungs. Now, that's a normal part of the way our bodies dive, and all aquatic mammals as well, right? Now, it's a trainable part of the body. The deeper we dive, the more experienced we are, the more years we've been diving, the stronger it gets. In the case of most freedivers and the case of most spearos and most freedivers are actually progressing too deep too fast. They are spearfishing at depths, or they are diving at depths that their blood shift, which is a part of the mammalian dive response, is not strong enough to keep up with. So, all right, so Ellie, Ellie had recently done her instructor course with me. On her instructor course, she made an astounding gain, you know, like she'd gone from being, you know, I suppose like a 20, 25 meter diver to being a 40-meter diver in the space of a few weeks. And it was really quite remarkable. She's quite the gun. But because she'd done this in a short time, she has not then been diving at those depths for a long time. I also, 42, Ellie.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Pete.
I will naturally make the assumption that her dive reflex hasn't had the years that it requires to become strong enough to handle doing a jagged movement at depth. Because the truth is, I can go down to 25 meters and do a fucking backflip, and I'm not going to squeeze my lungs. But my dive response can handle that. And this is just something that we have to keep in mind. We have to keep in mind that that the pressure of depth is immense, and I suppose the strength of our blood shift, or the strength of our mammalian dive reflex, will really be a huge determinant in how deep we can dive, and probably more importantly, how deep we can spearfish. And this is why it's really important for people who are getting into deeper spearfishing is to understand that deeper spearfishing takes years. Deeper spearfishing is something that you slowly progress to over many, many years, because you're doing big, aggressive movements at depth, and you don't know what you're going to do, right? Like, you don't know where your spear is going to get dragged off into. You don't know what's going to happen on that dive. So you need to assume that at whatever depth you're going down to, you're going to have to use some force. It's really funny, actually, because the more that I've got into the world of spearfishing, the more I've noticed how many bloody spearfisher people are having lung squeezes, right? They're having lung squeezes because they're spearing too deep. They'll go and they'll take a freediving course, which is great because they get all the safety information they need, and they work on their technique, and they become better divers. But then they want to go and spearfish at those depths, and that's the wrong mentality, because it takes years to go from being to compare it, 20-meter freediver and a 20-meter Spiro is the difference in years of development. So it's something that takes a long time, and we just have to be patient. And there's no other way to really frame that. Carmen, let's go to the last video. Ellie, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I guess, yeah, like what you just said was the biggest point to it. I had just done that course with you, and I was comfortable with diving to 40 meters. And I thought, hey, like I can dive to 40 meters. Now I'm going to go out and that dive where I did blackout, I was almost at 30. So I was like, yeah, this is the same thing. I'll be sweet. But yeah, it was not sweet. Big lessons were learned though. Big lessons were learned. And yeah, Jordan was stoked that all his training paid off, and he could come get me quickly.
Totally. Well, big lessons, Ellie. Big lessons learned when you dive buddies on the ball at hand, revives you real quick. Otherwise, no lessons are learned and everyone's sad. Right. So what I'm going to do now, this is actually the last video is a really old video. This is as Gallagher's Blackout from Back to Basics. And I find this one really interesting because these guys were really young when this happens. They really don't have a lot of or little to no safety knowledge at the time. And we'll talk about kind of what they did wrong and what they could have done in the future and why this blackout happened in the way that it did. So in short, Az is cruising down and he sees a big fish. Yeah, classic story. He keeps going deeper. He's probably at the stage where he should turn around, but he's something like 21 years old here and testosterone is a thing. So he shoots the fish, he starts swimming back up, and he's cruising and cruising and cruising, and then you're going to see him just start to, and he's just, this is his mate's GoPro now. You can see him, oh, and there the bubbles go. That's his GoPro on his head. And my video is cut out, so I can't see. Oh, anyway, there you go. You can see he's unconscious. Now, Carmen, do you want to whack the sound on in this video really quick? We can whack the sound because he says something here that's kind of important. So you can see that he did not respond very quickly, right? Like the guy was unconscious for a little bit, and then he's like, "Oh shit! I should go over there and save him." I didn't actually see the end of the video, but I'm probably on the worst internet here, so I assume everyone else did.
That was me. I had a moment there.
Always that sort of sense, you know, you're there with a group of really good heroes, and you want to, you want to back.
Having technical difficulties tonight, guys. I'm sorry. 1 second here. Let's just share. Sorry, just 1 second here.
I'll just keep narrating. So he gets up to the surface, and his friend, which is Jack, he's trying to revive him, and he's like, "Breathe, mate, breathe!" And you can see he starts to try to blow on his face, but he's spending more time just yelling at him rather than doing what he needs to do to revive him.
Went down deeper, followed it.
The young guys,
and that's where it all sort of blacked out for me, and I don't remember anything else. Breathe, Az. Right, get the fire. Az, breathe. Az, breathe. Breathe, Az. Burn! You know, reflex kicked in, and I just started giving him mouth to mouth on the surface, trying to get some oxygen back into him. And luckily that after about 45 seconds of mouth to mouth on the surface, he eventually came back to it. So thank goodness.
That's breathe. He's alright, he's alright. Breathe, mate, breathe. Hang on to the boat.
All right, so let's unpack this one. So blacks out underwater, and then his mate comes in, grabs him, brings him to the surface. He does a half decent rescue attempt. Probably should have gone, I suppose, more aggressively on the blowing. But I don't know if those guys were really up to speed on these things at the time. They were very young when this happened. But the one that I suppose the real key when we're talking about doing, I suppose, some like freediving forensics, the real key here is, why did it take 45 seconds to wake him up? And why did he require mouth to mouth? So most blackouts will resolve in like that person waking themselves up really quickly, or that person being woken up very quickly. For the most part, as soon as a bit of air is moving around on the receptors on the face, the person will wake up. Because keep this one in mind, when it comes to reviving a blackout, all the body needs is to be shown the signs that it is in a safe place to wake itself up. It's not about being revived. It's about providing the circumstances, as if I'm the buddy provides the circumstances for the unconscious diver to register that they are safe to wake up. So the body is waiting to feel the air on their face. They're waiting to feel that they're back in the atmosphere. So if I take a diver out of the water and it takes me, a minute or 30 seconds to revive that diver, then there has to be some other sign telling that diver that it's not safe for them to wake up. And that is fluid in the lungs. So in my opinion, on this dive, Az had a lung squeeze. He was, probably swimming a little bit too aggressively, probably having some good contractions at depth. He might have gone a little bit too deep. He shot a fish. He's stressed. He's cruising up, all tense. He busted a lung, which is why it required, rescue breaths or that period of time to wake him up. And this is pretty common for any blackout that takes a long time to revive the diver, is that there's actually fluid in the lungs. Either that diver was underwater for such a long period of time, they inhaled water, or more commonly actually, they had a lung barotrauma and there is fluid, aka blood, in their lungs. And that fluid, that blood, is giving their body the signal like, no, you're underwater still. There's fluid in the lungs, not safe to wake up now. And it's not until we blow air into the lungs, not to oxygenate them, because they certainly don't need to be oxygenated by our secondhand air. We blow air into their lungs to tell their body that they're back in the atmosphere. It's safe for them to wake themselves up. Cool. So I like that case study, just because we can do a bit of forensics with it and look at what, why this happened. And it's not a normal blackout. A normal blackout is what you saw in the first video. Person comes up, they're unconscious, they get a bit of help, or they don't get a bit of help, and they revive themselves, or they snap back out of it. When it gets long, something else is going on. Things are getting more complicated. So I suppose the last thing. Let me just before I go on to our very last thing, I just want to say now that for the most part, all of these injuries don't take place on one dive. They are the sum of many dives, or they are the sum of a long day in the water, or many days in the water. It's the sum of fatigue, right? If you go out in the boat and go spearing all day, or you go diving all day, you're doing, sometimes, bloody 100 odd dives in the day, and you're tired. Maybe you hurt your lungs early, some point earlier in the day, and as time goes on, you slowly make it worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, right? We're talking about compound injuries over the course of many days or many dives. And this is why it's important to just always dive conservatively, to never be going for those big hero dives. Always keep it so far within the realms of what you are capable of and what is safe, because it's not about It's not about what you get away with on one dive. It's about the scope of what you're doing in the entire day, because the injuries usually build over many dives, like fatigue builds over many dives. And a lot of these, you know, we're blacking out because we have lung injuries or vice, you know what I mean? It can be a complicated scenario. There's a lot of different things going on. We are holding our breath underwater under immense pressure, and our body responds, you know, very differently, depending on which part of our body we're talking about and which person we're talking about to that environment or to those, you know, that stimuli. The lucky last thing I really want to talk about before we go to questions again is decompression illness. And I suppose I don't want to go into this a lot. I don't have any fun videos for this, but I do just want to say that decompression illness is a really, it's a really great way we can die. In freediving, freedivers do get decompression illness. In general, the only way to, I suppose, like stop decompression illness from happening is to pay attention to our surface interval. So we spend I suppose like the algorithm. It is an algorithm. The algorithm that we use is whatever atmosphere of pressure that we went to, we times our dive time by that atmosphere. And we always round up. So for example, at 10 meters, there is 2 atmospheres worth of pressure. So if I spend a minute at 10 meters, I have to spend 2 minutes on the surface to off-gas nitrogen out of my body. If I spend a minute at 20 meters, there's 3 atmospheres worth of pressure. I have to spend 3 minutes on the surface to get nitrogen out of my body. Decompression illness is a buildup of nitrogen, and in every single, like, in the case of every single human, pretty much you will recover in terms of you'll feel ready for your next dive as far as how you feel before your body has had a chance to off-gas all the nitrogen you've built up on the dive. Now, most of the time when we get decompression illness, we get it because we've been diving many days in a row, or we get it because we've been doing some stupid deep dives. But I do just want to talk about it just as a thing to know of and a thing to avoid. And all you have to do is respect your surface interval. Whatever atmosphere of pressure you went to, times that by your dive time, and always round up. So if we dive down, if we spend a minute at 15 meters, we round up to 20, right? Always rounding up to the next atmosphere. So then a minute at 15 meters is the same as a minute at 20 meters, 3 minutes on the surface. And now, in saying all that, because nothing operates in a vacuum, what are some other things that can contribute to us having decompression illness? I mean, our hydration contributes to us having decompression illness. Our age contributes to us getting decompression illness or not. Whether we've had it in the past or not. Like, do you see what I'm kind of getting at here? Like, and it's the same with all these things. It's the same with lung issues. It's the same with hypoxic blackouts. Like, there are an incalculable amount of factors that lead towards you having these injuries or you having these incidents. And so the truth is, the only thing a diver can do is dive conservatively and have many layers of safety, right? Your buddy is always there to take care of you. You only dive in a certain way. You only attempt certain dives. Like, does that make sense? Like, there's many tiers of safety. It's not just, you know, see what we can do. Because the truth is, especially if your buddy isn't there, is that if your buddy is not there, the difference between you having a little samba or a short blackout or whatever and you dying is just that, is how close is your buddy to you? Or is your buddy there at all? So your buddy is super important. Cool. So let's have some questions. That's all I'm going to ramble for now. Well, I'm happy to sit around and do questions for a while and that kind of jazz. So who has questions?
Amazing. Okay, Adam, we've got a couple of questions here. I'm just going to quickly go back and get those very quickly. So the first one, Olivia, could you just confirm? Oh, hang on, here we go. We have, the first one's from River. So about blackout, blackouts, pre-panic. River, are you there? Can you unmute yourself, please? No?
I believe it was not, basically she was panicking, like thinking of if you panic not being able to get to the surface in time, could that lead to a blackout, like hyperventilating type deal? Is that a factor?
Well, we wouldn't, if we're panicking because we wouldn't be getting to the surface, I assume we're underwater, so we're not hyperventilating. But yeah, of course. I mean, like this is one of the 1,000,001 factors that can lead towards, you know, a person blacking out or not blacking out. How much are we exerting ourselves during our breath hold? You can probably guess that you can hold your breath for a lot longer if you're stationary than if you hold your breath and sprint or just be stressed, right? So what you're doing is it's a huge factor towards if you're going to black out. I just saw a question that popped up that I really want to answer, Carmen. It was something about a friend of his had a slumber and insisted he was safe to die that day or something along those lines. Should be the most recent one that came up.
If your
But
buddy
the answer to that question is no.
How would you make him stop from diving again today? He's asked. If that had happened.
Oh, I would
so the question
them.
is, your buddy had a slumber and he's okay. How would you make him stop from diving again today without too much violence? And someone else has said that someone disappeared recently.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was a very well-known Australian fisherman that died recently, but I really don't want to talk about that because I mean, it's too soon. I don't know the guy, you know, and it's not something I really want to go into, but what I would say to you is that no amount of violence is below the level that is acceptable for making that person not dive that day. If a person sambas or blacks out and then is like, no, I'm fine, I want to keep going, like the answer is like, no, this is an idiot move and I'm not going to be responsible for your idiocy. So just so you know, if a person blacks out or sambas and dies, their day isn't ruined. You'll be traumatized for the rest of your life. Rescuing a blackout is much more traumatic than having a blackout. Don't dive with stupid people because you will have a much shorter dive career than you want. Much shorter dive. You like, no one wants to go out and pull corpses out of the water. And when a person has a blackout, man, they look like a corpse. They're pale. They're shaking. There can be foam coming out of their mouth. It's horrific. You don't want to dive with that person. So either stop diving with them or insist that this is this is the criteria in which I will dive with you. But in the end of the day, if they want to insist on doing something which I view as being too reckless for me, that's up to them, right? But you know, for the most part, the diving community categorizes that as being too reckless to be okay. So yeah, what's our next question?
Okay, so we've got a couple from Andre. Yeah.
Yep. Just a second. Here we go. Yeah. I remember, like, I did my kind of main block of training a couple of years ago. So some things are a bit, forgotten some stuff. But I remember something about it's much easier to have a blackout as you're coming up at a shallower depth, and that's got something to do with the effect that the pressure has. So the deeper you are, the more pressure there is, and it's something to do with the oxygen being better utilized or being kind of pushed into your blood in a more effective way at higher pressures. Does that sound right, or is that totally off?
So what? Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is partial pressure and how oxygen responds in the body according to that. Yeah, exactly. Let's not. I don't want to go into that only because I'll have to explain a reasonable amount of physiology to really
that's
touch
okay.
on what you're saying. But for the most part, I mean, like what you think happens. Yes.
Perfect.
Sorry, I just don't want to get bogged down in like a 10-minute explanation on the physiology to do the question justice. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, all good. Thanks.
Great. All right, all good. All right, who we got next?
We've got a question from, I'm so sorry, Monir, is it?
Munir Tarfis.
Do you want to unmute yourself?
Munir is très cool. Come in.
Munir is not here. Okay, let's go to the next one. We have one from King about the hoods before. Oh no, is that a question, Liv? Was that a question? Yeah. King, are you there? No? Let's go on to Nina. Nina, are you there? You had a question about learning from previous situations. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I've actually never dived before, so I do a lot of underwater photography, kind of like free range kind of stuff. And just like hearing you guys talk about you know, all these different types of breathing and like with spearfishing and I constantly question like how much really does your instinct play, like when you're at certain depths, are you so focused on spearing that fish so much that you're not kind of listening to try and avoid that kind of situation of being you know, having that shallow water blackout in all those different levels.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, like, yes, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
Look, okay, but it also depends on how much of a 18-year-old boy you are, as in how young, dumb, and full of testosterone.
I mean, like,
even
if you were, yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, even if you were young, and no matter how much experience you do have, and like at what point, and like even like as experienced as you guys are, and you still get that shallow water blackout happening, and it sounds like it's quite common. Is that correct?
No, it's very uncommon. When we do seminars like this, like, you know, we talk about all these extreme scenarios like they're every day, but for the most part, almost every freediver will go their entire life without experiencing a blackout or even seeing one.
Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Learning stuff. I'm learning stuff.
But you know, yeah, but like, to be honest with you, like becoming fixated on whatever it is you're fixated on underwater, whether that be like some wildlife or snapping that. I tell you what, getting that photo can be as all-consuming as getting that fish.
That's exactly,
So that really just comes down to like a personal approach. I'm not sure if we have an instinctual response to it. But I would, you know, the more experience we get, the more we're happy to back off. And maybe even the other way around. Maybe the more experience we get, the happier we are to keep pursuing. So it's probably just from person to person, that one.
Yeah, it differs. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I've got back from King, who's just sent, he said his microphone wasn't working. I'm sorry, I have to keep feeding back through. Here we go. It was a question about what is the most effective way of waking someone up. Do you throw off the mask and hood and then blow on their face? Do you lightly splash in the water, calm speaking? He's asking for the best way to wake somebody from blackout.
All right. Yeah. All right. So let's say we've had a blackout. Now just keep this in mind. What our goal is as the person doing the rescue, our goal is to provide or place that person in the circumstances in which their body feels safe to wake itself up. Does that make sense? Their body is waiting to be given the signs that, okay, now we're in a safe place to wake up. So the best way to do that is to get them out of the water, and I just mean like to the surface, take their mask off, and to keep their face in the air. So we really want to make sure we don't let any water splash up on their face, because we have receptors in the skin in our face that are registering if we're in the atmosphere or if we're immersed in the water. Surface, mask off, keep their face out of the water, and just blow onto the skin around their face, and particularly their eyes where the receptors are the strongest, and just say their name and tell them to breathe. That is the way that we wake them up. Don't slap them on the face, don't splash water on them. We removed it used to be called blow, tap, talk. We removed the tapping because we found that A, there was no proof that it was effective, and B, most of the time people were just splashing water onto the person's face, which is exactly what we want to avoid. So support, blow, talk, breathe, calm, and breathe. That's how we do it.
Breathing. Okay, awesome. Next question. We'll just do a couple more. I'm sorry, we're still filtering through, just trying to get all of these. There was a question from somebody who's asked, was it Carla? You said you'd like to ask a question? Yeah?
Yeah.
Hi, Carla.
So we've been talking about the blackouts, and I was wondering about the spectrum of blackouts, because I Samba would be quite extreme. But for example, when you feel like you're not responding to the people around you, but you're not actually passing out and completely out of control, if you know what I mean, is that also considered blackout or not? And is it the same thing?
Well, yeah, look, this is hard. Like, where do we draw the line between consciousness and unconsciousness? And I don't mean to get philosophical on you, but you know, where do we do that? So this is how I tend to play things. We experience, so anytime you hear the term hypoxia, all we're referring to is when your oxygen levels dip below what your normal bodily function is. So that happens to you on any dive in which you, let's just talk about percentages, because they're really, really easy to round up. Like obviously at 100% you're unconscious, right? So you'll start to become hypoxic at about 40% of the way through, right? And then between 40% and about 90%, you're just in the realm that we're calling hypoxic to a varying degree. Then when we go from sort of like 90% to 100%, then we're experiencing acute hypoxia. And acute hypoxia is, and just keep in mind, these are not medical things, these are just atom things or freediver things that we just make to define these scenarios. Acute hypoxia is when you're experiencing the symptoms of hypoxia. That being, you know, your vision is starting to cave in. You can't really hear the things around you. You're slowly losing consciousness. You're slowly losing control of your limbs. You're losing your motor control, right? Because that's what the other word for some is an LMC, a loss of motor control. And then as we're getting towards that 100%, then we're in blackout zone. So if you're coming up from a breath hold and you're like generally like, whoa, I've no idea who you are and where you are and what's going on. A bit like a stunned mullet, I would say you're about 90.
Oh, I didn't hear that, but 90 something.
Yeah. Basically, if you're coming up from a breath hold or a dive, and you're not really present, and you can't really take in, you're kind of like, oh, what's going on? Who are you? What's happening? You're probably about 98, 99% of the way through to full unconsciousness.
Yeah, cool.
So I would personally call that a blackout.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
If you lose consciousness, even for a moment, for me, that's a blackout.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Carla. There's been a lot of, I'm just been trying to scroll through to, what's up. I think we're sort of getting to about final question time. Adam, have you seen anything in there that you, sorry?
I haven't looked. I've been keeping the chat away.
No problems. I think we did have one. Duncan had one. Duncan, you had one about eating for freediving. Do you want to maybe ask that question very quickly, and Adam will have a quick squiz and.
I don't know if I should have the last question because I don't know how relevant it is, but it was more around like I can't get up in the morning and not eat, and I usually dive before work. And does eating have an impact on like your body processing stuff? So if energy is going somewhere up, is there any concerns around that?
Yeah, totally. I wouldn't say there's concerns around that, but if you are digesting food, your performance will be dipped. You'll get the urge to breathe a little bit earlier. You'll also use a little bit more oxygen, because a lot of your blood supply will be pulled towards your stomach for digestion. Now, in saying that, I like to smash a coffee and have a bacon egg roll before I go diving. Not deep diving, but if I'm going for a fun dive or a spear, like I do whatever the hell I want. Man, do you know what I discovered the other day? I discovered energy drinks. I've never had energy drinks before, like as an adult. I can't remember having an energy drink. And I was smashing cans of Mother on the boat, and it was amazing. Like, it was an amazing day. So like I just go nuts. Do you know what I mean? Like, live your life. Just know, obviously, with your stomach, you will be able to perform better. But you can still, if you're doing the dives you're happy with on a full stomach, I say be happy and be full.
Oh, that's the best advice I've got.
But maybe one day you'll go to a deeper spot Or maybe like one day you'll do like, you know, like a charter somewhere where you want to be like a bit more on your game. And then, you know, just to, you know, eat fruit in the morning for breakfast instead of something heavier, or don't eat it all and see how you go. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I'm all about caffeine before getting in the water. Yeah, caffeine is life.